Alright boys, welcome back to another video. Swaggy here. Today we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings, the 4-0 Vikings that have beaten the San Francisco 49ers, the Houston Texans, and the Green Bay Packers, and they've also blown out the New York Giants. No other team has been able to do that. Everyone talks, oh, the Giants are so bad. Well, how come every game the Giants have been in was one score, right? They're a very solid team. Daniel Jones has looked pretty good. But my thing for the Vikings is, although they did beat the Packers, they took a massive L in the sense of taking their foot off the gas, and a lot of you guys pointed this out in my last Vikings video after the game, and I completely agree. So the Vikings, they get up to a 28-0 lead, and then what happens? There's a muff punt. It ends up resulting in a touchdown, and in the second half, the Packers score 22 points, and the Vikings only score 3. If it hadn't been for some missed kicks, of course, and Jordan Love not being at his best, the Packers win this game, and we're having a much different discussion right now. But with that being said, the Vikings did win this game. They're 4-0. A win's a win no matter what. Even if you're up 50-0 and you win 50-49, you still won the game. But my thing for Minnesota is they definitely have to learn from this, because Brian Flores, the reason why the Vikings dominated the first half is because he was blitzing. And all of a sudden, you get a big lead in the second half, and you go into zone coverage, you stop blitzing, you're conservative, and Jordan Love finds a rhythm and gets comfortable. And that's why in the second half, the Packers offense was so damn good. That cannot happen moving forward. Look at the Baltimore Ravens, for example. If you guys have been following them, they play with a lead, and then they just take their foot off the gas and they end up losing. Like the Raiders, for example, they had a 10-point lead late against the Raiders, and they blew that at home in week 2. So you have to take that same sort of example for the Vikings and say, well, why are we doing that? It doesn't matter if it's an offense or defense. Even defensively, you have to keep applying pressure. You have to play every single game the same, right? And that's how I look at the Vikings. Is I was disappointed about how they looked in the second half, but they still won, and it's a learning experience. And there was way more good than bad. There wasn't much bad outside of that. You look at the good. Sam Darnold, guys. I mean, he is making NFL history. Sam Darnold became just the second quarterback in NFL history to go 4-0 and throw 10 or more touchdowns in his first 4 starts with a team, the other being Patrick Mahomes. When you've done something that only Patrick Mahomes has, you know that you're a very good quarterback. And Darnold, this is the first time in his career outside of the Niners last year when he was the backup, where he walked into a favorable situation, a coach who knows what he's doing, who played the position, receivers, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, an offensive line has probably the best tackle punch in football, and then the defense that is as good as it gets. I think the Vikings have the best defense in football. It's either them or the Steelers, but considering the fact that the Steelers fell behind 17-0 to the Indianapolis Colts and got lit up by Joe Flacco, I'm going to go with the Vikings. Now, my thing for Minnesota is they did not apply, I'm not going to say they didn't apply pressure. That's false. They only had 1 sack. Jordan Love was sacked 1 time, but he was under a ton of pressure, which doesn't show up on ESPN's box score. The reason for that was because the Packers schemed away Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. Van Ginkel did make some good plays. I thought the linebackers overall were very good, including Blake Cashman. He was one of the best players on the field. But the Packers, they had a game plan to sort of take away those guys. But the Vikings, they still found a way in that first half to be able to apply pressure and make it tough on Love. And they forced 3 interceptions, and you look at those picks, I mean, it was all just Love trying to make a play, trying to extend something. And you got to give credit to the Vikings secondary as well, because we give the front all the credit, but the Vikings had 12 pass breakups and 3 interceptions, which is just beautiful. But looking at the Vikings defense, they have been the best in football, because if you look at the opposing quarterback's offensive grades, Daniel Jones 57.2, Brock Purdy 61.2, CJ Stroud 64.6, and then Jordan Love 68.8. I mean, that is unbelievably good. I mean, that just doesn't happen in the NFL. 4 games and you hold quarterbacks, and high-level quarterbacks too. CJ Stroud, but a lot of people think he's a top 5 quarterback. Jordan Love is definitely top 10 quarterback. Daniel Jones is pretty solid, man. He's not considered one of the better quarterbacks, and then Brock Purdy is definitely like up in the top 10. So, I mean, we're looking at 3 top 10 quarterbacks that the Vikings have just absolutely shut down. And when you allow 389 yards on 54 attempts, that's understandable. That's a lot of attempts. 4 touchdowns of 3 picks. You'll definitely take that ratio. I mean, 4 touchdowns, you never want to give that up. But if you're going to get 3 interceptions, then it kind of makes up for it. But for Minnesota as well, I think the last thing that I want to talk about is going to be Sam Darnold, Aaron Jones, and then these receivers. So we'll start off with Sam Darnold. So this is probably the biggest takeaway that I'm going to say in this video, and that's going to be his long-term future with the Vikings. Now, it's only been 4 games. Do I think Sam Darnold's legit? Yes, and I thought he was legit even with the Panthers. I mean, yeah, they got off to a good start, whatever, but Sam Darnold's always had the talent. He just needed the proper coaching. I mean, why do you see guys like Bryce Young struggling right now? Well, Tua was struggling before he got Reek and Waddle. Now, of course, he's been starting to figure it out up until the injuries and concussions and things like that. But it's just a lot of these quarterbacks, they go into situations that aren't favorable and they struggle, and everyone blames the quarterback. But it's the same thing with Sam Darnold. Is he finally has talent and a coach who believes in him, and he's thriving. Now, how does that impact the Vikings long term? Well, they have J.J. McCarthy on this roster. So what do you do with Darnold? To me, I do think the Vikings should extend him. 3 or 4 year deal. I know a lot of Vikings fans are going to disagree and say, hang on a second here. We've got Darnold on a cheap contract. That's why this is so beautiful, or at least it's a large reason why it's so beautiful. Because if Darnold was making $35 million a year, I mean, yeah, it would still be cool. But the fact he's making what, like 6, or I forget if it's 6 or 8 million, he's making under 10 million a year. So it's just an absolute steal. You have to understand that J.J. McCarthy is 21 years old. He's going to be coming off a major injury. I'm not saying that he might not be the same player. That's ridiculous. I think McCarthy is going to be great. And I liked him, of course, coming out of Michigan. But my thing is that, well, can the Vikings have an answer until he's ready to go? Whether that's a year or 2, maybe it's the entirety of his contract. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Quarterback is the hardest position to play in the game. It's one of the hardest positions to play in all sports, maybe the hardest position. So for the Vikings, they've got to go out there and just continue to build around Sam Darnold, because he's still very young. He was drafted in 2018, but he's 27. And he won't be 28 until June. So very young guy that's not even really in his prime yet. Big arm, good athleticism, hasn't made a lot of mistakes. 3 of those picks, well, let's say it really was 2, because one of them should not have been a pick. It was a bad call by the officials. It was clearly an incomplete pass. So Darnold, essentially 11 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Fumbles have been a concern. That's my one thing about Darnold, is you've got to be able to pick up the pressure, and you've got to make sure that your guys are lined up in the right position. It's your job as a quarterback to do that. There have been some mistakes. It hasn't all been perfect for Darnold. But guys, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 73.5 QBR. So he's 3rd in QBR. He's 1st in touchdowns. 932 yards, is 9th in football. Yeah, the picks, they're 3 picks. You never want to throw 3 picks, but an 11-to-3 ratio, I'll take that any single day, and I know Vikings fans will as well. For Darnold, I think the best is yet to come. I do think he continues to play well. I do think he's going to be in the MVP conversation. And we did talk about that for McCarthy, saying that, well, when he entered the NFL, he's got the most around him. He's got the receivers, T.J. Hockenson when he comes back, Aaron Jones, Kevin O'Connell, a defense that's going to be able to hold the opposition, which makes your job as a quarterback easier, knowing you're going to be playing from ahead a lot. We just didn't know it would be for Sam Darnold. This is exactly why people say where you're drafted to often dictates your success long term, because if Darnold had landed with the right organization instead of the Jets, which was the worst possible place, worst possible place to go was the Jets, and Darnold went there. People kept him around. He was with the Panthers, he was with the Niners, and then of course the Vikings bring him in because people know that Sam Darnold has a lot of talent, and they want to coach him, and they want to try to put it together and help him reach his potential. And for all we know, Sam Darnold might be the quarterback of the future for the Vikings. I don't even think that's that crazy to say. Maybe the Vikings are like, no, McCarthy's our guy. If Darnold wants a lot of money, we'll let him go somewhere else. But to me, I don't even think that should be on the table. You can't ask for anything better than Darnold's doing. And if he continues to play like this, there's no way you let him go.